Welcome back, everybody, to Fantasy Fest right here on Fantasy Pros. The Fantasy Festival of Friendship continues, and it's not just good alliteration. We've got two of the best minds in the fantasy space here. Jim Sanis, who does fantasy and betting stuff for FanDuel. We always love having him on the show. And from FTN Fantasy and Sirius XM Radio, the man, the myth, the legend, Jeff Ratcliffe. I can't believe we got both these guys to hang out with us for a half hour and talk about one of my favorite subjects, which is the busts. I'm usually the positive Pete around here. I like always to push the positivity, but let's be honest. It's fun to warn people of the doom and gloom. It's fun to put on the tinfoil hat for a moment and talk about the end of days, as it were, for certain players that might be coming. Jeff, I got to ask you this question. When it comes to busts, for you, is it any player that has ADP that is greater than you think their value is, or does a bust have to be somebody that is really in that upper tier of like the top 50 to 75 players to really qualify for you?
I mean, for me specifically, busts happen for two reasons. I think we have to be really clear on how we define busts. Like, if a player gets hurt, that player is injured. He is not a bust, right? What was the guy? Marcus Lattimore, not Marshawn Lattimore, the running back. Mm-hmm. We don't call him an NFL bust because he entered the league hurt. Like, it's a tragic story. I wish we could have seen that dude play, but he wasn't a bust. He's not like Ryan Leaf or somebody like that. Those guys were busts because they showed up. They did not meet expectations based on draft day capital, and therefore they were a bust. Or in fantasy, the quintessential example, I believe it was 2017, correct me if I'm wrong, it was either 2017 or 2018, the biggest bust perhaps in all of fantasy football history, Terrell Pryor. This dude played basically the entire season, was a third-round draft pick, and finishes like wide receiver 80. Like, that's a bust. So I think we have to qualify that. However, busts often happen in the collective consciousness of the fantasy football playing public because their expectations are too high. They draft players at their ceiling, and when you draft a player at his ceiling, he is going to bust. Kyle Pitts, in his rookie season, had 1,000 yards, had only been accomplished one time before. Mike Ditka did it, fewer games, but still, he did that. And because he had one touchdown, he was a fantasy football bust. Because he was drafted ADP 5 and finished tight end 6, he was a bust. He did not meet expectations. He did not meet the lofty ceiling that people had in their minds for him. He actually pretty much hit his ceiling, and it was still below those expectations. And by the way, just as an aside, not Kyle Pitts, not Julio Jones. They both had touchdown problems. Wait a minute. Oh, Matt Ryan. Wait a minute. Aha.
Yeah, could be.
But
something.
Anyway, I digress.
Jeff,
so
for you, what I hope
before
for you
I bogart
someday,
this whole thing.
Oh no, I love it. This is great.
Before I bogart this whole thing, that to me is a bust. Like, I'm not somebody who goes out and is like, this player sucks, he's going to bust. Like, I just think it's when people's expectations are too high.
Yeah, and I think that's a great definition. And, I hope for you someday, Jeff, that you find something that you're passionate about, because that's the one thing for you. I feel like you're always, in your shell, that I just want you to come out of it and just have some passion for once, especially about football. Just let it hang out once.
I'm really built for NPR, right? I have a future in NPR.
100%. I can't wait to talk about pumpkin spice lattes with you at the end of the show, and maybe some quilting if there's time.
Sweaty balls.
Sanis. Well, there's time. It's Sanis. I'm going to try my best to segue out of that one, Sanis, and I'll keep it clean if I can. But, for you, when you define the word bust here in fantasy football, obviously every year we have these players with expectations, and rightfully so. To me, where things always go chaotic is when we find something that we like at a certain ADP that's early on. And then as draft season goes on, the hype around that starts to inflate. Now, like Darren Waller is an interesting example too, because I understood the Darren Waller argument where he was going. And now all of a sudden, when you start cracking that top 100 ADP, now all of a sudden it goes from a really interesting value at a position where it makes a lot of sense to take a shot to, oh my God, he has to now return value. To me, those are busts we can avoid. Why do you think every year we get into this loop where certain players like that get overvalued?
We get bored. I think that's a big part of it. We allow ourselves to, when there's not a lot of information happening, we allow ourselves to latch on to things that are happening, and that can sometimes lead us down a bad path. So that's not just with regards to like camp hype and stuff like that, but it's also sometimes like extrapolating small samples. Like Mike Gillislee for the Buffalo Bills back in the day had one year where he was the most efficient running back in all of football. And it was over a small sample. We latched onto that. I latched onto that, and I overdrafted in the following year as a result of that. So it can lead to we have a full offseason to analyze things, and sometimes we're dangerous when we have too much time on our hands. So I think it can be a lot of latching on to the wrong data, whether it be camp hype or something else, and overinflating the expectations. And I think I love the phrase that Jeff said earlier, drafting at ceiling. And I think that's for a lot of the guys on my list. That's my concern with them for this year. It's not that I don't like the player, not that I don't like the situation. It's that I feel like they're being drafted towards their ceiling versus other guys around them being drafted towards median expectation. And that's not the kind of distribution you want to have there.
I love this because I did not have on my bingo card today that Terrell Pryor and Mike Gillislee would come up. I'm very happy we did have that. And I guarantee you no other fantasy show on YouTube is going to be talking those names today anywhere else, probably with good reason. But let's get to the names here on the list. We're going to work in reverse order of ADP from some of the lower ADP guys that these two gentlemen think could be busts, and all the way working up to some of those players that are really high on draft boards right now that maybe you should reconsider and start to maybe just think differently about. And if you don't get a good enough discount, maybe you just let them go. And don't forget, today's broadcast is brought to you by bettingpros.com. If you haven't already, make sure you sign up over at the YouTube channel. I know here on Fantasy Pros, we're at 200K subs already. We want to keep pushing that Betting Pros number as well. So go to youtube.com/bettingpros, subscribe, and don't forget to download the new BP app as well. Start betting smarter, not harder. Sync all your sports books, find the best lines, and start winning some cash. And check me out over there on the NFL Betting Show 5 days a week as well. All right, let's start with you, Jeff Ratcliffe. Now that we've given you some time to simmer a little bit, I want to unleash the beast. Number 5 in that list of ADP, who is a bust for you in 2023?
I have Cam Akers on this list, and really I could include most running backs going during the dead zone period, and I want to be really clear about that. The dead zone is a period in the draft. It is not a running back himself. Anybody who's going in that period could be identified as dead zone, but if they fall out of that in your home league drafts, they're no longer dead zone. So if Cam Akers was there in like the 7th or 8th round, okay, you're going to have to tackle me on my way up to the draft board before I put that sticker up there. However, where he's going currently, I know there's expectations there for him to be the early down running back. He's going to be the early down running back on a team that I dare you to recognize one other name other than Aaron Donald on their defense. I dare you. I dare you. It is a disaster right now for the Rams. They are going to throw the ball a bunch to Cooper Kupp. I have no concerns about him whatsoever, but he's about the only player at value right now I'm willing to invest in. My concern really specifically here is that they're going to play from behind a lot, and that will take the wind out of the sails of the early down work. And we should see some Kyren Williams, not enough to draft Kyren Williams or anything like that, but he will serve as the passing down back. As we've seen historically, Sean McVay just does not have the trust in Akers to be a true 3-down guy.
So Cam Akers, from a game script perspective, is more concerning to you rather than necessarily the odd journey that he had last year where he was the guy, then he wasn't in week 1, then he was going to be trade bait, then he was not traded, then he was put in bubble wrap, and then all of a sudden he was the savior in December. So that is less of the concern as opposed to the negative game script for possibly the Rams in 23.
Yeah, not much concern in terms of competition for touches. Zach Evans, who knows if he actually makes the team at this point. He was a little bit of a dandy, a dynasty dandy for the folks back in May. And we've seen the wind out of his sails here. Kyren Williams is kind of just a guy. I mean, I know, sorry, Notre Dame people, but he tested so poorly in the pre-draft process. He's a Sean McVay guy. Sean McVay likes this certain type of player, but I just don't see him eating into it. But the challenge is, if you're an early down guy on a team that may struggle to move the football, may kick a bunch of field goals, where are the points coming from? What are you averaging 14, 15 carries a game and not scoring touchdowns? That's going to be really tough. And he may be a really bland fantasy guy. Like, I don't think he's going to completely fall flat on his face like last year at the beginning of the season, but really bland. And if you're drafting an RB2, I think you could do better, even just by waiting. There are guys who are going well after him who really could exceed his production.
Cam Akers going as the 21st running back right now, 55 overall on fantasypros.com/rankings. You can go check them out. Jim, let's get to the first guy on your list. Number 5, who is it?
I've got TJ Hockenson there, and I think it goes back to what we were saying about expanding on small sample sizes, because last year Hawkinson's role at the Vikings is very good. Post-trade had like 11 targets in his first game against Washington. It was bananas what he did there. 23% overall target share in his full games last year, and a lot of those were actually downfield, which is great for a tight end. But they did add Jordan Addison. It's always possible he is more of a target earner than Adam Thielen was at that point in his career. I think that's at least a possibility. And Hockenson goes in a really weird range for tight end where, you could just spend up a bit to get a Kelsey or an Andrews, or you could save a bit and get a guy. I agree that the Darren Waller stuff's been kind of weird, but I might rather take Darren Waller a bit later than going with TJ Hockenson where he's currently going. So to me, it's a dual thing where I'd rather take a lot of wide receivers, some running backs in this range rather than go tight end. And I'm worried we're putting too much stock into a relatively small sample last year where Hockenson did command a lot of targets to the Vikings. I still think this offense will be fine this year. I think that everything they've said says they're still trying. The offensive line is okay. Their tackles are actually pretty good. So it's not an anti-offense thing. It's just kind of Hockenson's going in a weird spot where I'd rather go other directions.
I feel like that spot keeps changing too, Jim, because he's right now the consensus tight end 3 on FantasyPros, but I was in a draft the other night where both Darren Waller and Kyle Pitts went ahead of Hockenson, which again, to me, now all of a sudden we're opening up Pandora's box here where everyone thinks that they know exactly what's right about tight end. I just want the cheaper guy in that grouping if I can get him at the right price. That's it at the end of the day, because otherwise then I'll take the Chigaconquos, I'll take the shots on guys later on. Jeff, who's another guy on your list, number 4 for the biggest bust potentially of 2023?
I don't know if this is exactly an ADP order down here, but he's close to where Akers is going. It's J.K. Dobbins. Yeah. There are certain players where perception and reality just never seem to meet. Call it the Jordan Howard effect. I don't know, the Marlon Mack effect, whatever you'd like to call it. And this is not a knock on J.K. Dobbins. I want to be abundantly clear on that. If J.K. Dobbins receives 16 to 20 touches per game in a different offense, I think he'd be fantastic. But that is not the reality in Baltimore. You have the most, the best running quarterback in NFL history. And I'm not being hyperbolic. Lamar is it right now. That could change. Justin Fields could give him a run for his money. Maybe Anthony Richardson, who knows? But as of right now, we have not seen a guy this good. A guy who you basically write in Sharpie 150 carries, right? That's off the table. Then you bring in Gus Edwards, who Gus is not as flashy as J.K. Dobbins, but he's good. He's good for that offense. They will give him the carries. And then Justice Hill apparently is making some headway here as well. I don't expect the same offense, obviously, under Todd Monken there that we had with Greg Roman last season. However, we know what to expect out of Todd Monken. We saw it at Georgia last year. You're going to get a rotation in the backfield. So what is the reality for J.K. Dobbins? In our minds, it's this guy who can score all these touchdowns and produce like a top 15 guy. But the reality, player who's going to see 12 or 13 touches per game and has to be, Mark Ingram's big season with the Ravens, that type of touchdown efficient in order to reach expectations for a lot of people out there. And I just don't see it happening. Again, I love J.K. Dobbins, but I do think that a lot of the perception is at his ceiling, not at his midpoint.
Now, that being said, Jeff, Gus Edwards, who, look, I've been a fan of the Gus Bus for years because he's cheap and, like you said, productive. He's basically a free running back at the end of a lot of drafts. Is that somebody that you are going to pluck and put on your rosters because you think Dobbins has that potential to bust out? Or is it just too much Lamar and too much of other guys where Gus is irrelevant?
It's not that he's irrelevant. It's that if I'm looking in the late rounds, I better get more bang for my buck at running back than that. Okay. And this is for the casual drafters who are watching this right now. I know you. I know you very well. I know what you're going to do. You're going to go in week 3 and you're going to say, you know what, Gus Edwards, he just isn't getting it done. And then you're going to drop him, right? And it happens every single year. So I would rather, if I'm going to take a shot, it's going to be Roshan or somebody like that who, Kendre, somebody like that who has that nice high ceiling. Or I'm going to go after the, sort of free bingo squares that you're getting at wide receiver. You can still, I'm still seeing like Nico Collins, guys like that falling that far. Maybe he goes into the middle rounds. That's fine. Give me Mingo. Give me guys like that who have that higher ceiling in that range, as opposed to, Gus. I mean, we know what he is. And granted, if J.K. Dobbins went down, then we're talking a different ball game there, but I don't want to bank on injuries. All
right, let's get to another one here on your list, Jim. Who is number 4?
I've got Terry McLaurin there, and I think that this is because I see multiple paths to disappointment here, and that's the way I want to think about things, is paths to disappointment. And I think there are 3. The first one is he's got this turf toe injury now. It sounds like he should be good to go for week 1, but foot injuries like that can always linger, and they can hurt guys even when they're playing. So that's one path to disappointment, is an injury. Second one is that Jahan Dotson actually like earned targets toward the back half of last year and early on in the season too. So he had that injury in the middle part of the year. Before that, Dotson was getting some targets, wasn't doing a lot with them, but in his 5 weeks where he had a full-time role towards the end of the year, Dotson had 23.8% target share. McLaurin is at 23.1% in that time. And Dotson had more deep targets too. Now that could be we're putting too much stock in small samples thing, which I cautioned against before, but I think Dotson's a pretty talented player. McLaurin, I think, is talented too, but I think that his competition for targets now will be more intense than it has been in years past. The third one is I like Sam Howell. I liked Sam Howell coming out. I think Sam Howell is going to take a lot of sacks, and that can hurt offensive efficiency. So even though I like Sam Howell and think he could be good, there is always a possibility that he just takes too many sacks and is a detriment to this offense. I don't think that's going to happen because I do like Sam Howell, but like that is within the range of outcomes. So to me, injury with the turf toe, Jahan Dotson taking away too many targets, Sam Howell uncertainty. I think there are too many paths to failure for me to be for me to be too high on McLaurin. Now, if he slips, I'll take him because he's a good player. And I think that offense is kind of fun. But I need him to slip for me to justify taking him right now.
Dotson's last year at Penn State was very inconclusive for me because he was playing with second and third string quarterbacks. Everyone kept getting hurt. So really the tape wasn't very good. So it took me like going back and seeing the combine going, yeah, you know what? Dotson is really good. I think we forget that. And I remember that season in those rookie drafts I had, like I specifically was watching him in the combine because I wanted to see what he was going to do and what he was going to perform like. And that was a really good reminder. And I got him in a couple of spots because of it. And I think if that patient's going to be rewarded this year in Dynasty and in redraft as well, Dotson's that guy to watch as opposed to the McLaurin ADP. All right, let's get to number 3 on Jeff's list for potential bust. Who do you have?
Well, I'm going to defend this player from last year, but then I'm also going to warn against him. Guys, you can't determine a bust at Halloween. Anybody out there, if you're going to victory lap at Halloween and claim a player as a bust, you can't do that. You got to wait until January to figure this thing out. Najee Harris did not start very well last season, but he finished well because of the touchdown production. But then by the same token, his inefficiencies really are where this stems from for me. So I'm not going to call him a bust last year, but I do think if you're going to draft him, chances are he's your first running back, right? The way that things work out, I could see somebody going wide receiver and then maybe the tail end of the second round, like if you're in that Jefferson Chase range, and then all the top guys are off the board, you go for him because you don't want to go with Jonathan Taylor or Josh Jacobs right now because of the risk. You could end up with Harris as your number 1 running back. That feels very blah to me in the second round, where I could then also go in a different direction at wide receiver and just have firepower at that position. My concern is the inefficiency. He's not going to pop off long runs. He's not going to do really much of anything there. So he's got to be volume based. He's got to score touchdowns. Jaylen Warren is making a case to be heavily used in that offense. Not heavily used as in he's going to out-touch Najee Harris, but heavily used as in maybe he creeps up closer to a 60-40, especially if he's going to rip off long touchdown. Now, Jordan Poyer could have taken a better angle on that play in the preseason here, but still, if he's going to provide that level of explosion to the offense, you can't keep that genie in the bottle. You have to start using him. So that's another concern. A volume-based player who could have his volume eaten into, a player who's not particularly efficient, a player who could be your RB1, that just feels like a recipe for failure.
It's interesting. I ended up drafting him in our league, in our Superflex flex league. He's my second running back, though. Yeah. And after Chubb, having a volume guy like Harris, that makes me feel warm and fuzzy. I still got A.J. Brown, still got Mahomes on that roster. Those are the first 4 picks. But I felt kind of like, all right, well, like as my second guy, I can understand it. But I think you make a good warning, which is, I think is that number 1 running back for you in fantasy. There could be some downside there. If you want a chance to win a glorious 36-inch fantasy championship trophy for your league, courtesy of our good pals over at Trophy Smack, the number 1 destination for epic fantasy tournament trophies, you need to subscribe to Fantasy Pros YouTube channel right now. Drop a comment below in this video, and that's it. That's all you got to do. We'll be announcing a winner today, so stick around for all of Fantasy Fest and make sure you turn on those notifications so you can claim your prize, which is that incredible trophy, courtesy of Trophy Smack. The next guy on Jim's list, let's talk about it. Who is it?
Yeah, I've got Derrick Henry at number 3, and I think that a lot of people, when they worry about the Titans, worry about quarterback play. I actually don't. I think Ryan Tannehill's fine. Like I thought last year when he was healthy, he actually played okay. It's the offensive line that bothers me. I love that they drafted Peter Skoronski because go Cats for Skoronski. But like, if your best offensive lineman is a swing tackle, like a tweener tackle guard who has never played a snap in the NFL, probably not a great thing. Now, Henry last year got a lot of passing game work, which was huge for him for fantasy, and it led to really good production. But now that DeAndre Hopkins is there, they may not need to use Henry as much as a pass catcher. And if he struggles with efficiency, which he did as a rusher last year, there's a lot of paths to destruction here. So I think that if you guaranteed me he would maintain the same work he got in the passing game last year, I'd be totally okay with him. I can't get that guarantee, and I'm worried about this offensive line. And, you know, if they do struggle out the gate, there's always the potential they could turn to, you know, Will Levis, Malik Willis, whatever it may be, as a backup to see what they can do. I think that Henry, again, is the same thing with all these guys, where if they fall far enough, fine, but it's hard for me to take Henry over a lot of the wide receivers who are going in the range around him. So to me, given I'm concerned about the offensive line, concerned about the offense bottoming out, and concerned about the efficiency for him, if he's not getting that passing game work, that to me is enough red flags for me to go elsewhere in that range.
So the discount not enough in 2023 for you, because it is discounted off of previous Derrick Henry years, but still not enough for you to get excited. What about in a standard league? Is that where Henry, you start to have that conversation internally with yourself, or no?
I haven't played in a standard league.
Well, I know you and I don't, but some people out there, you know, those people that Jeff was yelling at before, these people make these decisions where they still play in leagues like that.
Yeah, I would have to think about it because I have not played in one in a very long time, honestly. So it's been a bit, but I think he's more defensible there. But even there, you know, if I'm depending on the passing game work, it's still going to be dicey because then you need a lot of yardage. And I think the yardage is the part that gives me the most pause because of the offensive line potentially just being like the worst in the entire league.
Yeah, life's too short to play in standard leagues, and it's too long to play in tight end premium. I am annoyed at tight end premium. Maybe that's just me. Jeff Ratcliffe, let's get back to your number 2 guy, potential bust in 2023. Who is it?
Well, 2 things first and foremost. Tight end premium is not tight end premium. It's Travis Kelce premium. If you want to make your leagues premium, add an extra starting tight end spot. That will make them premium. And don't invite me to those leagues because that sounds like it sucks. Secondly, the difference between PPR, non-PPR, and half-point PPR is nada. Last year, Nick Chubb finished as the number 5. He's a non-PPR guy, right? Number 5 running back in non-PPR. In half-point PPR, he finished as the number 5 guy. And in PPR, he finished number 6 by 0.6 points behind Saquon Barkley. So really, anybody out there, if you're like, well, is it PPR? Is it not PPR? Doesn't matter. You know, there's a reason why FantasyPros uses half-point PPR to gauge accuracy. It's the beautiful middle point, and you could honestly get away with just using those rankings for any draft out there. But I agree, I'm not in standard leagues anymore either. Okay, now, why is everybody out there trolling me? Seriously, guys, what is happening with this Calvin Ridley stuff? And it's escalated. Originally, I was like, okay, he's at wide receiver 20 way back in like May, June. I'm like,
no, yeah, a little more than that. He was at 24 when it started, Jeff.
Something like, what is he now? 17? What's his ADP right now? 18. 18 for a guy who hasn't played in a year and a half. The last time we saw him, did not play well as the number 1. Julio Jones was out of the mix.
Wait, but Matt Ryan, we can go back to your Matt Ryan argument if you want to do that. You did say
that's fine. He just won't score touchdowns. He'll get volume, but he just won't score touchdowns because Matt Ryan's kickers were always awesome because they just flame out in the red zone. But ultimately, and I like Matt Ryan, he's a nice guy. But ultimately here, you have, yes, he's stepping into a great situation. But there's also a situation with Christian Kirk coming off a breakout year. Zay Jones, who? Coming off a breakout year. Evan Ingram, coming off a breakout year. Travis Etienne also can catch the ball out of the backfield. And the last time I checked, the Jags are still playing with one football, and we're not going to see Trevor Lawrence throw the ball 700 times this year, especially when they invested in another early down runner in Tank Bigsby in this year's draft. So what is our outlook here? What is our maximum? I can see Calvin Ridley potentially finishing as wide receiver 18, 17, 16, closer to his ceiling. but his floor is much lower than that as well. And I think that people are doing the Jim Carrey Dumb and Dumber, put their fingers in their ear, la, 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 I can't hear you. I only remember 2021. I don't remember the rest of it all. I don't remember anything else or beyond that, like back to his big breakout year. I don't remember anything else. This is all I remember. And this is all that matters to me right now. And I just think that's a major mistake. Actually, it was 2020 was his breakout year, whatever. That's all they're remembering. That's all they're remembering.
Yeah,
and we get this all the time. People gravitate towards that name brand and then ignore everything else. And then you're going to hear it in late October, early November. He just isn't getting it done. Ridley's screwing my team over. But meanwhile, the drafters are out there, the ones who are drafting him at his ceiling. I have him ranked at 26 right now among wide receivers, which implies he does have the ceiling to go into wide receiver 2 territory, but I just can't draft him at that ceiling.
No, I think, again, this is a perfect example of a guy whose price has gone up. Let's go to you, Jim, for your number 2 bust, and then we'll close out with the top guys.
Yeah, it's a guy, again, who's just going a bit too high for me. Would rather take other guys in this range, and that's CeeDee Lamb. Lamb last year, if you look at the time after Dak Prescott came back from his injury, 26% target share. He got most of the team's deep targets, like a 45% deep target share, which is a very good number. But now, adding Brandon Cooks, who's a guy who can still earn targets. Michael Gallup is another year healthier off his torn ACL. So I think that the target competition for Lamb will be higher, especially when you compare him to other guys going in this range at wide receiver. There's not as much competition for Amon-Ra St. Brown or Devontae Adams as there is for CeeDee Lamb. Now, I love that he has a good quarterback in Dak Prescott. I love that he plays half his games indoors. I think those are both great things, but I'm concerned that this offense may be a bit more run heavy and a bit slower with Kellen Moore not at the helm anymore, Mike McCarthy taking the reins there. So again, if he slips, I'm fine taking him, but increased target competition, potentially a slower offense, and potentially a more run-centric offense, those are all things that make me feel like CeeDee Lamb is going a bit earlier than he should, and I'd rather take guys with better median expectations who are going a bit below him.
Makes sense to me. All right, let's get to the big ones now. Number 1 on your list, biggest potential bust for 2023, Jeff Ratcliffe is...
Well, the guy going highest in ADP, because I'm going to say it's Calvin Ridley, but I have Jahmyr Gibbs here. And again, not a knock on the player. I think he is super exciting, but we heard the head coach of the Detroit Lions say, we have 2 roles. We have a workhorse, and we have a guy who's going to go out and dissect. He said Gibbs is the guy who's going to dissect the defense, and we're going to give the workhorse. Now, coaches always over-exaggerate, like the Bruce Arians. We're going to give David Johnson 30 touches per game. That's 480 in a season. That's never happening back then. But he said we're going to give this guy 20-plus carries. That's David Montgomery. Last year, Jamal Williams had 33 goal line carries. Now, I don't expect that for David Montgomery, but still, that role is the coveted role. And Gibbs, another guy, up.
Right. That's my problem, too. I liked Gibbs going into this year in June, July. It was great. All of a sudden, mid-August, I was like, what are we doing here?
It's too high. People love rookies. I get it. But it's just too high for me right now. And I hope I'm wrong. I do, because I really like the player a lot.
But Jeff, he went from a flex RB to now he is a potential low-end RB1, like in this range. It's kind of crazy. Jim, I know you got one more big name for us. Who is it on the potential 2023 bust list?
I've got Austin Ekeler there. It just seems it's a bit too touchdown dependent for me, because last year Ekeler had 100+ yards in scrimmage in 7 out of 18 games, counting the playoff game against the Jags. 7 out of 18 games, the 100+ yards in scrimmage. That's not ideal, but he got by for fantasy from touchdowns. And that's awesome, because it seems like they want to use him there. They want the high leverage touches going to Austin Ekeler, but that's not always going to break that way. It's not always going to be where he converts as often as he does. Maybe he can, because he's a really freaking good football player. But the concern is, if the touchdowns go away, you're going to have some really rough weeks. So you're not going to get that from a lot of guys going as high as him. So again, it's always price dependent. If he winds up slipping towards the bottom half of round 1, that's a different discussion. But I want more of a yardage median expectation for my guys that I'm taking that high. I don't want them to be as touchdown dependent. And at least based on the way he was used last year, that was the case for Ekeler. So my concern is, I want more yardage expectation from guys I'm taking that high in the first round.
Great names, great guests, great insight. This is very lucky for us. We get to sit down and talk with you guys. Jeff Ratcliffe, everybody, and Jim Sanis. Fantastic. Thanks again, gentlemen, for joining us here. These are some big names that you all should contemplate now. I'm looking at some of my rosters. I've got a bunch of these names, but I got them cheaper because I'm an early expert drafter. Not now. You guys are all up against it. These are some hard decisions as these ADPs have risen on some of these players, but have gone from intriguing to possibly damaging. So that's the difference. It's not about the player. It's about the value you're getting that player at. So never forget that. We come back from our break. More Fantasy Football Fest right here on Fantasy Pros. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this.